She had crossed half a country for a man she had never met, and he sent back a letter that didn't even use her name. Just the girl from Santa Fe. Like she was a shipment, like she was something that could be returned. Elena Navarro sat on a wooden bench at the edge of the world, a train ticket in one hand and nothing in the other, watching dust curl up from a street that didn't know she existed. She had sold her mother's earrings to afford the journey. She had practiced her smile for weeks. And somewhere out there, a man had already decided she wasn't enough. Drop a comment with the city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. And if you stay until the end, you'll understand why she didn't get back on that train. The train had been late by 4 hours. Elena had not slept in 2 days. Those were the two facts she kept returning to as the locomotive finally groaned to a stop at Clearwater Creek Station, a platform of splintered wood, 3 crates of dry goods nobody had collected, and a hand-painted sign with the letter C that had partially peeled away so it read, Clearwater Creek, like some kind of omen she should have paid more attention to. She stood at the top of the passenger car steps with her single trunk and her carpet bag and the carefully pressed blue traveling dress that had taken her 3 evenings to sew. Behind her, the other passengers pushed and shuffled past with the indifference of people who had somewhere to be. A woman in a yellow hat knocked Elena's bag with her elbow and didn't look back. A porter called out something about luggage that Elena didn't quite catch because she was too busy scanning the platform for a face she had only seen in a single photograph. Slightly blurred, taken from too far away, a man in a dark coat standing beside a fence post with his arms crossed. She had studied that photograph so many times she could close her eyes and reproduce it down to the shadow falling across his left shoulder. He was not on the platform. She told herself it was the 4-hour delay. She told herself a working rancher had obligations, couldn't simply wait around a train station half a day. She picked up her trunk, heavier than she remembered, or maybe she was just tired, and carried it down the steps herself because the porter had moved on. The platform wasn't much. A station master's booth with a cracked window, a bench with a missing slat, 2 men in dusty coats talking to each other with the easy disregard of men who owned whatever ground they stood on, a dog sleeping against the wall of the freight building. The mountain air hit her the moment she stepped off the last step, thin and cold and carrying the smell of pine and something else, something she couldn't name, something that felt like the edge of everything familiar falling away behind her. She set her trunk down. She set her bag down beside it. She straightened her back, which ached from 2 days of train seats, and she looked out at what was, according to every letter she had received over the past 4 months, about to become her home. Clearwater Creek was not what she had imagined. She wasn't sure what she had imagined. Something from the illustrations in Harper's Weekly, maybe, a frontier town with character and purpose. But this was rougher. The main street visible from the station was unpaved and rutted from wagon wheels, flanked by buildings that leaned slightly into each other like tired men at the end of a long day. A general store, a feed supply. What looked like a saloon with its curtains drawn. A small church at the far end of the street with a cemetery beside it that seemed, from this distance, to hold more residents than the town itself. It wasn't beautiful, but Elena Navarro had not come all the way from Santa Fe, New Mexico, because she was looking for beautiful. She had come because she was 24 years old, and she had spent those 24 years watching the world happen to other people. She had come because the letter from a man named Harold Fitch had described a ranch that needed managing and a life that needed building, and had used, more than once, the word partnership. She had come because her father had died the previous winter and left her and her mother with a house that was already mostly borrowed time, and because her younger brother needed money for his apprenticeship, and because Elena had looked at the life in front of her in Santa Fe, seamstress work or housekeeping for the Whitfield family on Calle Real, or waiting to see if one of the men from her mother's church finally decided to ask a question he'd been circling for 3 years, and she had thought, no. She had written back to Harold Fitch the same week she received his letter. That was 4 months ago. Now she stood on a platform in a town she had never seen, and he was not here. She waited 20 minutes. The 2 men in dusty coats finished their conversation and left. The dog woke up, looked at her without interest, and walked away. The station master came out of his booth, glanced at her, went back inside. The 4-hour delay stretched in her mind. Maybe he had given up. Maybe he'd gone back to the ranch. Maybe he was simply a man who ran late and she was standing here catastrophizing over nothing. She walked to the station master's booth and knocked on the frame. The man inside looked up from a ledger. He had mutton chop whiskers and the permanently squinting expression of someone who spent most of their life outdoors. "Excuse me," she said. "I'm looking for a Mr. Harold Fitch. He was supposed to meet me here. She hesitated because saying I'm his mail-order bride still felt strange in her mouth, still felt like a thing she hadn't entirely agreed to, even though the letters had said exactly that. "I was expected. Elena Navarro." The station master's squint deepened. Something moved across his face that she couldn't quite read. "Fitch," he said. "Yes." "Harold Fitch. Runs the double F spread about 6 miles east." "That's right." He looked at her for a moment too long. "Hold on," he said, and disappeared into the back of his booth. When he returned, he was holding a sealed envelope. He held it out to her the way you hold something out when you'd rather not be involved in what it contains. Her name was written on the front. Not Miss Elena Navarro. Not even Elena. Just the girl from Santa Fe. She looked at it for a moment. Her hand, when she took it, was steady. She noticed that later, how steady her hand was, as if some part of her body already knew what her mind hadn't accepted yet. "He came by this morning," the station master said. His voice had gone careful. "Left that for you." She broke the seal. The letter was not long. Harold Fitch was not, apparently, a man who believed in wasting paper. "I have decided this arrangement will not suit. I made inquiries after your last letter. I was not informed of your background and find I cannot proceed knowing what I now know. You should return to where you came from. I have left $10 at the front desk of Calloway's boarding house, which should cover your train fare back. I wish you no ill. H. Fitch." She read it twice. "I was not informed of your background." There it was. 4 months of letters, careful, considered letters. Letters she had reread and edited and stayed up past midnight composing because she wanted to get them right, reduced to the problem of her background. Elena Maria Navarro, born in Santa Fe. Daughter of Miguel Navarro, who had come north from Sonora with his family when he was 11 years old, and of Catherine Blake Navarro, whose grandmother had been Irish and whose grandfather nobody talked about. Brown-skinned and dark-eyed and carrying a last name that told a certain kind of man everything he thought he needed to know. She folded the letter. She put it in her bag. She thanked the station master, who looked profoundly uncomfortable, and she picked up her trunk and her bag and she walked to the bench on the far end of the platform, the one with the missing slat, and she sat down. The mountains were visible to the west, purple and indifferent against the late afternoon sky. The wind came down the main street and kicked up a little dust and died again. Somewhere down the block a door slammed. Elena sat very still, and she did not cry. She had promised herself, on the train somewhere in Kansas, that whatever happened in Colorado, she would not cry in public. She was not going to be the woman crying at the train station. She had her pride, which was not worth much practically speaking, but was, at this particular moment, the only thing standing between her and complete dissolution. You should return to where you came from. Her mother's house in Santa Fe, which belonged to the bank in 6 months if the back payments weren't met. Her brother's apprenticeship fees. The job at Mrs. Whitfield's that she had turned down, burned that bridge when she'd written to say she was heading west, and Mrs. Whitfield did not rehire people who left. The $10 at Calloway's boarding house. She ran the numbers automatically because she had been running numbers her whole life, managing her family's books since she was 16. Train fare back to Santa Fe was $8, maybe $8.50 with fees. That left $1.50. She had $3 and some change of her own. She'd spent most of her savings on the journey here. Total, $4.50, give or take, in a town where she knew no one, with nowhere to go but backward. She sat with that for a while. The afternoon light shifted. A wagon rolled past on the main street. 2 women in bonnets walked together on the far side, talking with their heads close together. A child ran past the station entrance chasing something, a hoop, maybe, or a dog, and disappeared around the corner. Elena opened her bag and took out the photograph of Harold Fitch. She looked at it for a long moment. The blurry image, the fence post, the crossed arms that she had somehow, humiliatingly, read as confidence rather than as the closed posture it actually was. She put the photograph in her coat pocket. She would throw it away later. Not here. Think, she told herself. Stop feeling and start thinking. You are good at that. You have always been good at that. Options. Return to Santa Fe. Option assessed and dismissed. Returning with nothing, owing her mother more borrowed time, watching her brother lose his apprenticeship. She couldn't do it. Not yet. Option 2. Find work here. She scanned what she could see of Clearwater Creek from the station. It was small. Frontier towns didn't have much use for women who knew double-entry bookkeeping and could read contracts in 2 languages. They needed cooks and laundresses and teachers if there was a school, which she couldn't see from here. She could cook adequately. She was not going to pretend otherwise. Option 3. Something she hadn't thought of yet. She was still working through the math of option 2 when she heard the sound. It was small, a soft, shoe-scuffing kind of sound, and it came from behind her. She turned. A little girl was sitting on the ground about 6 feet away, half hidden by the corner post of the station building, watching her with the undisguised intensity that only small children and owls can sustain without social consequence. She was perhaps 6 or 7, with brown hair escaping from 2 braids that had been done with more determination than skill, wearing a dress that had been hemmed up unevenly, and boots that were too big for her feet. Her eyes were large and very serious. She had a scratch on her chin that was in the final stages of healing. Elena looked at her. The girl looked back. "Are you lost?" Elena asked. "No," the girl said, with the slight offense of someone accused of something they consider beneath them. "Are you lost?" "That," Elena said, "is a very good question." The girl considered this. "You've been sitting there a long time." "I know." "Are you waiting for someone?" "Not anymore." Elena turned the answer over as she said it and found it was true. She was done waiting for Harold Fitch. The girl stood up, dusting off the back of her dress with the brisk efficiency of someone who spent a lot of time on the ground. She walked forward, no hesitation, no shyness, just the uncomplicated directness of a child who had decided she was interested, and stopped about 3 feet away. Up close, Elena could see that her eyes were dark gray, the color of the sky before rain. "My name is Maggie," the girl said. "What's your name?" "Elena." "That's pretty." Maggie sat down on the bench beside her, carefully avoiding the missing slat, as if she had sat on this bench before. "Did something bad happen?" Elena looked at her. "Why do you ask?" "Because you looked like my papa looked when Mama died," Maggie said. She said it the way children say things that would take an adult 3 sentences and considerable hedging, straight and plain and without any apparent awareness of the weight of it. Like the whole world went away somewhere. The whole world went away somewhere. Elena looked out at the mountains. Her throat did something complicated. "I'm sorry about your mother," she said when she trusted her voice. "It was a long time ago. I was 4. I don't remember her very much." Maggie said this matter-of-factly, and then, because children do not dwell, she immediately pivoted. "Where did you come from?" "New Mexico, Santa Fe." "I don't know where that is." "It's south. Very far south. Warm in the summer." Elena paused. "Very warm. Is that why you came here? Because it was too warm?" Despite everything, the bench, the letter in her bag, the $10 at Callaway's, Elena felt something in her chest loosen, just slightly. "No," she said. "I came here to—" She stopped. "How do you explain mail order arrangements to a child?" "I came here to start something new." "Did it not work?" "Not the way I planned." Maggie thought about this. Papa says plans don't always work out, but mostly things work out anyway. "Your papa sounds like a sensible man." "He's okay," Maggie said, with the particular lukewarm endorsement of a child who loves someone completely, but would never say so that directly. "He's over there." She pointed toward the far end of the platform, where a man was emerging from the freight building with a clipboard, talking to a station worker. Tall. Broad through the shoulders, dark coat, work-worn at the elbows. He hadn't seen them yet. "You wandered away from your father?" Elena asked. "I don't wander," Maggie said, in the same tone she'd used for Lost. "I explore." Cole Brooks signed for the freight delivery, 2 sacks of winter wheat seed and a box of machinery parts he'd been waiting 3 weeks for. And when he turned around, his daughter was sitting on a bench at the other end of the platform next to a woman he had never seen before. He exhaled through his nose. Maggie did this. She was constitutionally incapable of waiting in one place for more than 4 minutes. He had, over the past 3 years of raising her alone, cycled through alarm, exhaustion, and resigned acceptance, and currently resided somewhere in the mild concern but probably fine zone. He walked over. The woman on the bench was young, mid-20s maybe. Dark hair pulled up under a traveling hat. A blue dress that was quality cloth, he noticed, even though it had the look of something carefully preserved rather than recently bought. She was sitting with her back very straight and her hands folded over a bag in her lap in a way that struck him immediately as someone trying very hard to look composed about something that was not composing itself. Maggie was talking. Of course she was talking. And the summer before last, we had a calf that got stuck in the fence, and Papa had to cut the fence and fix it the same day. Maggie, Cole said, stopping a few feet away. His daughter looked up. Hi, Papa. This is Elena. She came from Santa Fe. That's very far south. Cole looked at the woman, Elena, who looked back at him with a directness he hadn't expected. Dark eyes. Something in them that was either composure or the careful management of its opposite. Sorry if she bothered you, he said. She didn't, Elena said. Your daughter is very easy to talk to. He noticed the trunk then, a good-sized trunk plus a carpet bag sitting at her feet. He glanced at the trunk, then at her, then at the trunk again with the involuntary math of a man who lived practically. You just came in? Yes. She didn't offer anything else. Cole looked at the station master's booth, then back at the platform, then at the woman with the trunk and the very straight back, and the something is wrong here quality that he could not have articulated but recognized all the same, because he had spent enough years on the frontier to know the difference between a person who had arrived somewhere and a person who had run out of somewhere to arrive. You got people meeting you? He asked. A pause. Not long, but long enough. No, she said. Not anymore. Maggie looked up at her father with the expression she wore when she had decided something and was waiting for him to catch up. Cole looked at his daughter, then at Elena. Then he said, Is there something I can help you with, ma'am? And Elena Navarro, who had spent the last hour running numbers and coming up empty, looked at this man she had never met, this stranger with a clipboard and a daughter who explored rather than wandered, and said, I don't know. I've been trying to figure that out. She did not tell him about Harold Fitch. Not then. She told him she'd come expecting work that had fallen through, which was true in the cleanest possible way, and that she was trying to determine her options before committing to a course of action. She said this in the careful, measured tone she used when she needed to sound like she knew what she was doing. Cole listened without interrupting. He had the quality, she noticed, of a man who actually listened rather than just waited for his turn to speak. He leaned against the platform post and looked out at the main street while she talked, and when she finished, he was quiet for a moment. What kind of work? He asked. I can keep books, manage accounts. I've been doing it since I was 16. I can also cook, not exceptionally well, I'll be honest, and I can manage a household schedule. She paused. I read contracts in English and Spanish. I have references in Santa Fe. He looked at her then. She met his eyes and didn't look away, because she had learned a long time ago that looking away was interpreted as uncertainty, and she had enough actual uncertainty at the moment without lending it extra credibility. How'd you end up needing work in Clearwater Creek specifically? He asked. It wasn't an accusation. It was a practical question. I made a decision that didn't work out, she said. I'm trying to make a better one. He seemed to consider that for a moment. Maggie, who had been following this exchange with the focused attention of a small judge, tugged on her father's sleeve. Papa, she said. Maggie. The books, she said. Cole frowned slightly. What about the books? You said last week you were behind and you couldn't figure out the feed supplier numbers, and you said, Maggie took a breath, a word you told me I shouldn't repeat. Cole looked at his daughter for a long moment. I remember saying that. She does books, Maggie said, with the simple logic of someone connecting two obvious dots and not understanding why it was taking the adults so long. Cole rubbed the back of his neck. He looked at Elena again with a different kind of assessment this time. Not suspicious, just careful. He was the kind of man she could see who made decisions slowly, who turned things over. I'm not in a position to hire permanently, he said. The ranch is running, but we had a rough summer. I could offer maybe a month's work, room and board included. He seemed to hear how that sounded and added, "The bunkhouse has a room with a door that latches. My ranch hand Hector's family is there too. His wife Rosa. You wouldn't be alone." Elena did the math. A month. A month of room and board meant she could hold on to her $3. Meant she could figure out the next step without hemorrhaging what little she had. Meant she didn't have to get back on a train tonight feeling like Harold Fitch had won something. "I'd want to see the books before I agree," she said. He blinked. Then, almost imperceptibly, one corner of his mouth moved. "Fair enough. And I'll need a day's notice before any arrangement ends." "Also fair." "Then yes," she said. "I accept." Maggie made a sound that was not quite a cheer, but was the restrained 5 years older version of one. The ride out to the ranch took the better part of an hour, the wagon rattling along a road that barely deserved the name, through landscape that seemed to expand as you moved into it, the mountains growing and the sky widening and the grass going on past where you could see. Elena sat in the wagon bed with her trunk and bag because Maggie had claimed the seat beside her father and was currently delivering what appeared to be an uninterrupted monologue about a horse named Captain who had, at some recent point, done something impressive involving a fence. Elena let the sound of Maggie's voice run over her without trying to follow all of it. She was tired. The deep, strange tired of someone who has been holding tension for so long that when it finally loosens, even slightly, the body realizes all at once how much it was carrying. She thought about the letter, the girl from Santa Fe. She thought about her mother's earrings sold at the jeweler on Calle Real. She thought about the photograph she still had in her coat pocket, which she still hadn't thrown away. Later. She would throw it away later. She looked out at the land. The sky was going orange and pink at the edges now, the mountains catching the last of the light. She had spent her whole life in Santa Fe, where the sunsets painted the adobe walls the color of old fire, and she had thought she knew what western sky looked like. But this was different, bigger, somehow. More indifferent. Like the sky here didn't care whether you were watching or not. She found to her own mild surprise that she didn't entirely hate it. The Brooks Ranch was not prosperous exactly, but it was working. That was the first thing Elena noticed when the wagon came around the curve of the low hill and the buildings came into view. A main house that needed paint on the south side, a barn in better condition than the house, a bunkhouse set back from both, and fencing that went on in organized lines in multiple directions. It was the fencing that told her something. Neglected ranches had neglected fences. These were maintained. Rosa Flores met them at the barn. A solid, dark-haired woman in her 40s with flour on her apron and a directness in her assessment of Elena that was not unfriendly but was certainly thorough. "She does books," Maggie announced as Cole helped her down from the wagon. "She can stay in the room next to ours." Rosa raised an eyebrow at Cole. "Month's arrangement," Cole said. "Room and board." He carried Elena's trunk with the ease of a man accustomed to lifting things and set it on the porch. "Elena Navarro, from Santa Fe." "Rosa Flores," Rosa said. She extended a hand and shook Elena's the way you shake hands with someone you'll be deciding about over the next few days. "Supper's in an hour. You look like you haven't eaten." "I had something on the train," Elena said. "When?" She thought about it. "This morning, early." Rosa made the particular sound of a woman who has spent her life feeding people who underestimate their own hunger. "Supper is in an hour," she repeated and turned back toward the house. Maggie took Elena's hand without asking and led her up the porch steps, pointing out a loose board that she should step over because it had been loose for 2 weeks, and Papa kept meaning to fix it. Elena stepped over the board. She let Maggie show her the room, small, with a narrow bed and a window that looked out at the back field, and a hook on the wall for hanging things, and a latch on the door exactly as Cole had said. When Maggie finally ran off to help Rosa with supper, and Elena was alone in the room for the first time, she sat on the edge of the bed and put her bag on the floor and looked at the hook on the wall and the window and the latch on the door. She reached into her coat pocket and took out the photograph of Harold Fitch. She looked at it one more time. Then she put it in her trunk, under her second-best dress, in the dark where she didn't have to look at it. She was not the kind of person who threw things away simply because they had hurt her. She kept things. Evidence of what she had survived. She unfolded the letter from her bag. The girl from Santa Fe. She folded it again, tucked it in beside the photograph. Then she unpacked her ledger book, the one she brought everywhere, the one with her own personal account columns and notes going back 4 years, and she put it on the small table by the window. She put her pen beside it. Tomorrow she would look at Cole Brooks's books. She would figure out what was wrong with the feed supplier numbers. She would do the work that she had come here to do, even if it was not the work she had planned to do, even if nothing about this was what she had planned. She had not come all the way from Santa Fe to go home in defeat. Supper was beans and cornbread and a beef stew that was better than she'd expected, eaten at a table with Cole across from her, Maggie beside her, and Hector, Rosa's husband, a lean man with kind eyes who said little but laughed often, at the far end. Rosa sat last and ate fast, as people do when they've spent an hour cooking. The conversation was mostly Maggie, covering horses, the status of a rabbit she had apparently been trying to befriend, and a conflict at school involving a boy named Dermot who had said something about her boots that she found objectionable. Cole listened to all of this with the patient attention of a man who had long ago accepted that his dinner table would be narrated. Once, during a lull in Maggie's account of Dermot's offenses, Cole looked at Elena across the table. "Did you eat all right?" he asked. Which was just a polite question, but there was something in it, a checking, the same way you check on a thing that has been through some weather. "Yes," she said. "Thank you." He nodded and went back to his stew. Elena looked at her plate. She was not going to make anything of that. She was not going to make anything of any of this. She was here for the work. She was here for 1 month, to get back on her feet, to figure out the next step. She was here because a little girl had found her on a bench and asked if she was lost. And she had said, "That's a very good question," and she had meant it more than she'd let on. Outside, the Colorado dark came down fast and complete, the way it does when there are no city lights to soften it. The mountains disappeared into it. The stars came out, more of them than she had ever seen, even in the high desert of Santa Fe. Elena Navarro ate her stew and listened to Maggie's ongoing case against Dermot and his opinions about boots, and somewhere under the exhaustion and the humiliation and the careful management of her composure, something small and stubborn settled in her chest. Not hope exactly, not yet, but something that was not defeat. And for tonight, in this small room, in this working ranch, in this enormous Colorado dark, that was enough. The books were a disaster. Not a catastrophic everything is lost disaster. More the kind that accumulates quietly over 2 or 3 years when a man is too busy keeping a ranch alive to notice that his accounting has developed the structural integrity of a house built in the wrong season. Elena sat at the kitchen table the morning after her arrival with Cole's ledger open in front of her and a cup of Rosa's coffee going cold at her elbow, and she turned pages with the careful, deliberate attention of someone performing a diagnosis they suspect will not be pleasant. Cole stood across the room with his arms crossed, watching her the way people watch doctors look at something that belongs to them. "It's not as bad as your face is making it look," he said after a while. "I haven't made any face," Elena said without looking up. "You've been doing this." He pressed his lips together in a way that was apparently meant to illustrate her expression. "That's just how I read." She turned another page. "When did you switch feed suppliers?" "Spring of last year." "Did you renegotiate the rate or carry over the old contract terms?" A pause. "I assumed they carried over." Elena looked up at him then, and whatever her face was doing, he registered it. "They didn't carry over," he said. "The new supplier has a volume clause. You've been paying the base rate, but the clause entitles you to a reduced rate at your purchase volume. You've been overpaying by—" She did the math quickly in the margin of the page. "Somewhere around $11 a month for 14 months. Cole stared at her. "That's $154, approximately." The silence in the kitchen had a particular quality. Rosa, who was working at the stove, did not turn around, but her shoulders shifted in the way of someone exercising considerable restraint. "I can write to the supplier," Elena said. "There may be grounds to recover a portion of it, depending on whether the clause was disclosed at the time of the contract. Do you have the original agreement?" "Somewhere," Cole said. He sounded like a man who had just discovered a hole in his boot while standing in a river. "Find it," she said. "That's the first thing." She turned back to the ledger. "There are a few other things." He pulled out a chair across from her and sat down. "How many other things?" Enough that I'd suggest we work through them systematically rather than all at once. He looked at the ledger, then at her. You've been here one night. The numbers were here before I was, she said. I just read them. That was the beginning of the working arrangement between Elena Navarro and Cole Brooks. Not warm, not cold, but functional in the specific way that two careful people can be functional when they are both too practical to waste time on performance. She had her ledger and he had his ranch, and Maggie moved between both of them like a small, relentless connecting thread, pulling everything together whether anyone had asked her to or not. The days had a shape to them. Elena was up before light, which surprised Cole when he came in from the first barn check and found her already at the table with the lamp lit and papers spread around her coffee cup. She wasn't a person who slept late, she explained when he mentioned it once. She'd never had the option. He nodded and poured his own coffee and didn't push it, which she appreciated. Mornings she worked on the books. The feed supplier letter she drafted on the third day. Careful language, not accusatory. Laying out the contract clause and the overpayment calculation with the clean precision of someone who knew that a well-constructed argument was harder to ignore than an emotional one. Cole read it twice before signing it, and both times he asked her a question about it, and both times the question was good. He was not a man who signed things without understanding them. She marked that down in her private assessment of him. It mattered, that quality. Afternoons were less defined. Rosa had managed the household alone since her arrival at the ranch 2 years earlier, and she did not relinquish territory easily. Elena understood this without taking offense. She was the newcomer, and Rosa had built her routines around a specific set of facts that now included an extra person who had arrived under unclear circumstances. The first week they moved around each other with the careful politeness of two people sharing a kitchen they both considered their natural domain. It was the bread that broke it open, in the way that small things sometimes break open bigger things. Elena had grown up making her mother's bread, the dense, slightly sweet loaf that her grandmother had carried north from Sonora and that Elena had been making since she was 8 years old. On the 5th day, a rainy Thursday, when the books were caught up and the house felt too small for inactivity, she asked Rosa if she could use the kitchen. Rosa looked at her for a moment, assessing. "What are you making?" she asked. "Bread. My mother's recipe." "What kind?" Elena described it. Rosa's expression shifted. Not warm exactly, but curious. "My aunt made something like that," she said. "With anise?" "Yes, and a little lard." Rosa stepped aside from the counter. "Show me." They made bread side by side for 2 hours, talking in the mix of English and Spanish that came naturally between them. And by the time the loaves came out of the oven, something had rearranged itself in the kitchen that didn't need to be named. Rosa cut 2 thick slices and put them on the table with butter, and they ate standing up. And Rosa said without particular warmth but with evident sincerity, "That's good bread." Which was, Elena understood, not about the bread. Maggie ate 3 slices and declared it the best thing she had ever put in her mouth, which was what Maggie said about most things she liked, with a generosity of enthusiasm that Elena was beginning to recognize as the defining feature of the girl's character. Maggie was, in the plainest terms, difficult to keep distance from. She had attached herself to Elena with the uncomplicated certainty of a child who has decided something and sees no reason to question her own judgment. She appeared at the kitchen table in the mornings to watch Elena work on the books, asking questions with no apparent awareness that her questions might be inconvenient. She wanted to know what the numbers meant and how Elena knew which ones were wrong and what a contract clause was, and whether Elena had learned all of this from school or from someone. "Both," Elena told her one morning. "School first, then my father. He kept the books for a trading company when I was growing up. I used to sit with him while he worked." Maggie considered this. "Is he still in Santa Fe?" "No. He died last year." Maggie absorbed this with the directness she brought to all difficult facts. "Was it fast or slow?" "Fast," Elena said. "He was sick for about a week, and then he was gone." "My mother was fast too," Maggie said. "Papa doesn't talk about it. Rosa says it was a fever." She picked at the edge of the table with one finger. "Do you still miss your papa?" Elena looked at the ledger page in front of her. "Every day," she said. "But different every day. At first it's loud. Then after a while it gets quieter. It doesn't go away, but it stops being so loud." Maggie was quiet for a moment, which was not her usual state. That's what it's like, she said finally, as if confirming something she had suspected but not had words for. Elena looked at her. This girl with the uneven braids and the two big boots and the gray eyes, sitting in the thin morning light with flour on her sleeve from yesterday's bread, making sense of her life with the blunt tools available to a 7-year-old. Something moved in Elena's chest that she was careful not to examine too closely. "Come on," she said. "I'll show you what I'm working on." Maggie straightened up immediately, invested. The afternoons, when the weather permitted, Elena spent outside. She had not grown up on a ranch, but she had grown up in the physical world. The Santa Fe of her childhood was a place where you knew how to do things with your hands or you went without. She helped Rosa with the kitchen garden, learning the local soil, which was different from the high desert she knew. Heavier, colder, slower. She helped with the chickens, which she had never minded, and with the laundry, which she had always minded, but did without complaint. She watched the ranch. She watched how it worked and where it stuck, and what it needed, the way she had always watched systems, with the particular attention of someone who believes that most problems are visible if you look at them long enough. Cole was everywhere on the ranch and never entirely still. She saw this from the margins, through the kitchen window, from the garden, from the small moments when their paths crossed in the yard. He moved with the efficiency of a man who had learned to account for every hour of daylight, because there were never quite enough of them. He did not waste motion. He did not waste words. He was also, and Elena registered this as a fact she was not going to do anything with, younger than she had first estimated. When he was tired, at the end of the day, she could see it in the way he carried his shoulders. He was 30, maybe 31. Running a ranch alone, raising a daughter alone, managing everything a two-person life requires with one person's time and energy. He was doing a decent job of it. He was also clearly stretched thin. The first time they had a real conversation, not the efficient exchange of information over the books, but something that had the shape of actual talking. It was unplanned, the way those things usually are. It was the second week. Evening, after Maggie had gone to bed. Elena was on the porch with her ledger, trying to catch the last of the light, when Cole came out with 2 mugs of something that turned out to be weak coffee and set one beside her without asking. He sat on the step, which put him below her line of sight, and they were quiet for a while in the way of people who have been around each other long enough that silence doesn't require filling. "Letter came back from the feed supplier," he said. "I saw." Rosa put it on the table. "They're saying they can recover $60. Not the full amount." "It's what I expected," she said. The clause was disclosed, technically, buried in the addendum, but it was there. 60 is probably the realistic number. He turned the mug in his hands. "You knew they'd say that." "I thought it was likely." "Then why ask for the full amount?" "Because you always ask for what you're actually owed," she said. "You let them negotiate down. If you start at 60, they'll offer you 40. He was quiet for a moment. "I wouldn't have known to do it that way." "Most people don't," she said, without judgment. "It's not obvious." Another quiet stretch. Down in the barn, one of the horses moved. The night sounds of a working ranch, small, ordinary, constant. "Where'd you learn to read contracts like that?" he asked. She considered how much to say. "My father ran accounts for a trading company. He taught me the basics. Then There was a lawyer in Santa Fe, Mr. Archuleta. He let me read through old case files when the office was quiet. I learned a lot from that." "He paid you?" "No. He let me read his law books." She paused. "That was the payment." Cole turned that over for a moment. "And the arrangement that brought you here, the one that didn't work out." He said it carefully, looking at his mug. "You don't have to answer that." She had been waiting for this. She had known it was coming. It was a reasonable question, and he was a reasonable man, and 10 days of her working at his table and sleeping under his roof entitled him to at least the shape of an answer. "I came to marry someone," she said. She kept her voice even. "A rancher who had advertised. We corresponded for 4 months. When I arrived, he had decided he didn't want to go through with it." Cole said nothing. He was looking at the dark end of the yard. "He had made inquiries about my background," she continued. "My father was from Sonora originally. That was the problem." The silence after that was different from the silences before it. Cole turned his mug in his hands twice. "He told you that directly?" "In a letter, left at the station before I arrived. That's—" He stopped. Whatever he was going to say, he rerouted. I'm sorry that happened. I'm not asking for that, she said, which came out sharper than she intended. She corrected. I mean, thank you. I'm fine. I know you're not asking, he said. I'm saying it anyway because it was a lousy thing to do to a person. She looked down at the ledger in her lap. The numbers on the page blurred slightly, and she blinked them back into focus with more determination than it should have required. He didn't even use my name, she said, and she hadn't planned to say that. It just came out, the specific details she hadn't told anyone. The letter. It said the girl from Santa Fe. Cole's jaw tightened. She could see it from where she sat, even in the low light. That's a coward's way of doing a thing, he said quietly. Not loudly. Not performing outrage. Just stating it like a fact, flat and certain. Elena looked at the mountains, invisible in the dark, present as a weight at the edge of everything. Yes, she said. It was. They sat for another few minutes without speaking, and it was easier than it should have been. Then Cole said goodnight and went inside, and Elena sat with her ledger and didn't write in it for a while. Just sat with the quiet and the stars and the fact that she had told someone, finally, the specific detail that had been sitting in her chest like a stone since the platform. It didn't make it smaller, but it made it less alone. The second week folded into the third, and Elena stopped counting days the way she had in the beginning. She had started making small improvements to the ranch's record system. Nothing dramatic, just the kind of reorganization that makes information findable, that separates the quarterly accounts from the monthly ones, and creates a clear column for the cattle records that Cole had previously been keeping in a separate notebook that had no relationship to the main ledger. Cole looked at the revised system on a Thursday evening, compared it to the previous version, and said simply, "That's better." Which, she was coming to understand, was as much as he usually said when something was better. She found unexpectedly that she didn't mind it. She had spent her life around people who expressed things at length. Her mother talked through everything, circling and returning and circling again. Her father had been quieter, but even he had narrated his thoughts. Cole was different. With him, what was said was what was meant, and what was not said was genuinely not said rather than being withheld. She found she trusted the clarity of it. The thing she was more careful about was Maggie. Maggie had, by the third week, fully incorporated Elena into the architecture of her daily life, with the confidence of a child who has never been particularly interested in waiting to see how things develop before committing to them. She saved things to tell Elena specifically. She showed her a nest she had found in the fence row, 3 blue-gray eggs and a cup of dry grass. She brought a drawing she had done at school, a horse, identifiable by the 4 vertical lines that were legs and the circle that was a head, and put it on the kitchen table in front of Elena with the expectation of a response. "That's Captain?" Elena asked, looking at the drawing. "Yes. The other one is you." Elena looked at the second figure, which was a larger circle on top of a rectangle. "That's me?" "You have dark hair." Maggie pointed to a series of lines extending from the top circle. "See?" Elena looked at the drawing for a moment. "It's very good," she said, which was the honest answer. Not because the drawing was technically accomplished, but because it contained information about how Maggie saw things, and that was worth something. Maggie seemed satisfied with this. She took the drawing and went off somewhere, and Elena sat for a moment with the kitchen to herself, looking at the table where the drawing had been. She was becoming attached. She knew it. She had known it around day 10 and had been telling herself to be careful since then, with limited success, because the problem with Maggie Brooks was that caution didn't have an obvious foothold. The girl didn't ask for anything dramatic. She just kept showing up, with eggs she'd found and questions about numbers and drawings and the particular quality of her company, which was like being in a room where a lamp was on. You didn't always notice it was there until you imagined the room without it. And then there was the evening of the third week, when Maggie had a nightmare. Elena was still awake. She had been awake a lot of nights. This particular one, the product of a long calculation she'd been running in her head about the ranch's winter feed costs. When she heard the sound from down the hall, not loud, more a broken, half-conscious sound that she knew before she was fully out of bed was a child in the grip of something frightening. She went to the door of Maggie's room before she thought about whether she should. The room was small and dark, Maggie a pale shape on the narrow bed, and Elena stood in the doorway, uncertain. It wasn't her place. She wasn't the girl's mother. Cole was across the hall and was presumably capable of hearing his own daughter. But Maggie's eyes were open, staring at the ceiling, still caught in the half-world between sleeping and waking. Elena crossed the room and sat on the edge of the bed. "Hey," she said quietly. "You're okay." Maggie's eyes found her, the held breath moment of a child deciding whether this is still the nightmare or whether it's over. "Elena?" Her voice was small. "I'm here. It was a dream. You're in your room." Maggie reached out and took Elena's hand with both of hers, the grip of a child who does not care about dignity when they've been frightened. Elena sat still and let her hold on, and after a few minutes, Maggie's breathing evened out and her grip loosened and she closed her eyes again. Elena sat there until she was sure the girl was asleep, then carefully untangled her hand and got up. Cole was in the hallway. He had been there. She didn't know how long. He was in the doorway of his own room, and the expression on his face was something she hadn't seen before and couldn't entirely read. Not quite gratitude. Something older than that, and less easy. Neither of them said anything. There wasn't really anything to say. Elena went back to her room. She lay on the narrow bed and looked at the ceiling and listened to the ranch settle around her in the dark. The small sounds of wood contracting in the cold, the horses in the barn, the far-off something that might have been wind or might have been nothing. She had come here for 1 month. That was what she kept reminding herself. 1 month, and then the next step, and then the step after that. She had a plan. Loose still, not fully formed, but present. Save what she could. Write to a lawyer in Denver she had found a name for in one of Cole's old newspapers. Inquire about bookkeeping work in a larger town. Build towards something that was actually hers and not borrowed. She had not come here to build something that would cost her more to leave than she could afford to lose. She lay in the dark and knew all of that, very clearly and very sensibly, and also knew, in the less sensible place where things are actually decided, that she was already in some kind of trouble. The question was what she was going to do about it. She had no answer yet. But the month, she noticed, was not over. The month ended on a Tuesday, and nobody mentioned it. Elena had been aware of the date for several days, had been tracking it the way you track something you're not sure you want to arrive. She had the Denver lawyer's name written in the back of her ledger. Mr. T. Caldwell, Commercial and Contract Law, 14th Street. She had drafted a letter twice and not sent either version. The first was too formal, the second too uncertain, and she hadn't found the middle ground yet. Tuesday came. Rosa made biscuits. Maggie lost one of her hair ribbons and enlisted Elena in a search that covered 3 rooms and eventually turned up the ribbon under the kitchen table where it had apparently been for 2 days. Cole came in at midday, ate standing at the counter the way he did when he was too tired to sit, and said something to Hector about the north fence line. The day moved through its ordinary shapes. Nobody said, "Your month is up." Wednesday arrived the same way, and Elena was at the table with the ledger before anyone else was awake. And at some point during that quiet hour while the lamp was still lit and the sky outside was the particular gray of very early morning, she understood that she had made a decision without making it. The kind of decision that happens while you're busy thinking about something else. She was staying, at least a little longer. Not because Cole had asked her to, not because the arrangement had been formally extended, but because leaving on Tuesday would have meant walking away in the middle of something that wasn't finished. And Elena Navarro had never in her life walked away from an unfinished thing. She told herself that. She also told herself the ranch ledger was not actually finished, which was true. The winter accounts needed proper preparation, and the cattle records were still in the process of being integrated into the main system, and the feed supplier recovery had opened up 2 other contract questions that deserved attention. These were true things. They were also, she was honest enough to admit to herself in the gray silence of early morning, not entirely the point. She did not examine what the point was. She opened the ledger and went to work. Cole noticed. She knew he noticed because on Wednesday evening, when Maggie was in bed and Hector and Rosa had gone to the bunkhouse, he paused by the kitchen doorway where she was working and said, "You didn't leave." "No," she said without looking up. Month was up Tuesday. "I know when it was." He was quiet for a moment. "You're welcome to stay," he said. "Same arrangement. I meant to say that before Tuesday. He stopped. Cole Brooks did not flounder in conversation very often. She had noticed this about him. He chose his words with care and usually found the right ones. The slight difficulty he was having now was therefore more noticeable than it would have been in another man. "I meant to say it," he finished. "You can pay me what you can manage," Elena said. "I'm not in a position to be particular about the amount. I can do $7 a month, maybe 8 by spring if the contract's—" "7 is fine." Another pause. "All right," he said. "Good." He said good night and left, and Elena sat with the slight warmth of that, "You're welcome to stay," and did not do anything ridiculous with it, just let it sit there like a coal in the stove, small and functional. The weeks that followed had a different quality than the first month. Something had settled. The provisional nature of Elena's presence, the careful awareness she'd carried of being a temporary arrangement, a stopgap, loosened its grip, though it didn't entirely release. She still slept with her trunk half organized. She still kept the Denver lawyer's name in the back of her ledger. But her days stopped feeling like borrowed time and started feeling, cautiously, like time that belonged to her. She began to understand the ranch in deeper ways. Not just the numbers, but the physical reality of what the numbers represented. The 42 head of cattle, and what it actually meant to move them between pastures, the hay stores, and the calculation of whether they would hold through a hard winter, the machinery that was aging, and what that meant for the next year's costs. She walked the property with Cole one afternoon, both of them in heavy coats, the October air sharp and direct, and he talked her through the boundaries and the problem areas and the plan for the spring, and she asked questions as they walked. Not polite questions, real ones, about the North Pasture's drainage and the reliability of the creek in dry years. He answered them with the same directness. She noticed that he answered her differently than he seemed to answer most people, without simplifying, without the particular form of condescension that men often deployed toward women discussing land and money, consciously or otherwise. When she made a point he agreed with, he said so. When she was wrong about something, he told her why. "You ever think about buying the Kettner parcel?" she asked, on the way back. She had seen the adjacent land notation in the old records. "Thought about it," he said. "It would give you access to the creek from the east side, solve your summer grazing problem." "I know what it would give me." He pushed a low branch back as they passed under a tree, holding it for her without making a production of it. "Can't afford it right now." "How far off are you?" "Couple years, maybe, if the beef prices hold." She turned it over in her head. "There might be a way to structure an option agreement. Pay a smaller amount now to hold the right to buy within a set period. Depends on whether Kettner is motivated to sell." Cole glanced at her. "Where'd you learn about option agreements?" "Mr. Archuleta's law books," she said. "I told you. I read everything he had." He was quiet for a step or two. "You could have been a lawyer," he said. Not complimentary exactly, more like stating a fact that had become apparent. "Women don't become lawyers," she said. "Doesn't mean you couldn't have." She looked at him, but he was looking at the path ahead of them, and his face was its usual closed and practical expression. She filed the comment away with the other small things she had been filing away and not doing anything with. They walked back to the ranch in the same easy silence that had become, over these weeks, one of the things she trusted most about him. The trouble with Clearwater Creek itself started, as far as Elena could trace it, with a man named Garth Simmons. Simmons ran the largest ranch in the valley, 3 times the size of Cole's operation, with the particular confidence of a man who had been the biggest presence in a small place for long enough to consider that the natural order of things. He came to the ranch on a Friday in mid-October, unannounced, riding a horse that was considerably better than anything on Cole's property. Elena was in the yard when he arrived, and she knew immediately, from the way he looked at her and then looked at the house and then looked at her again, that he was recalibrating something. "Cole Brooks in?" he said, to the middle distance rather than to her specifically. "I'll get him," she said. She found Cole in the barn and told him Simmons was in the yard. Something moved across Cole's face that she hadn't seen before. Not quite apprehension. More the look of a man who has been expecting a headache to arrive and is not surprised to find it at his door. "What did he say?" Cole asked. "Just asked for you." He wiped his hands on a cloth and went out. Elena followed to the yard, and Cole did not ask her to go inside, so she stayed. Simmons was a broad man in his mid-50s with a gray mustache and the leathered look of someone who had spent decades outdoors. He smiled when he saw Cole, the wide, easy smile of a man who held more cards than he needed. "Brooks," he said, How's the winter looking? Can't complain, Cole said. This was not true. Elena had just spent 3 days helping him calculate whether the hay stores would hold, but it was the answer you gave, and she understood why. Good, good. Simmons glanced at Elena again. This your... He paused, the pause doing work. Elena Navarro, Cole said. She manages accounts and operations. Simmons seemed to find this mildly amusing in a way he was polite enough not to express fully. Heard you had someone new out here. Clearwater Creek talks, you know. He said it in the tone of a warning delivered as friendly information. Can I help you with something? Cole asked. Simmons dropped the smile, not entirely, but enough to show there was a different version underneath it. Cattle Association is meeting next month. Some of us been talking about the Southern Range access, the state land corridor. We want all the Valley ranchers in agreement on the usage terms before we present to the land office. What kind of agreement? Equal share. All ranches get the same access window. He paused. Smaller operations get the same as bigger. All equal. He said equal twice, which Elena noticed, and the second time he said it there was something underneath it that wasn't quite what the word usually meant. I'll think about it, Cole said. Don't think too long. Meeting is November 3rd. Simmons swung back up onto his horse with the ease of a man who did it 50 times a week. He looked at Elena one more time with a directness that was not quite rude and not quite anything else, just a registering. Miss, he said, and rode off. Cole watched him go, and his jaw was doing the tight thing that meant he was turning something over and not enjoying it. What's actually in the agreement? Elena asked. I don't know yet. He said equal access windows, but he came here specifically to make sure you'd sign. Cole looked at her. I know. Smaller operations getting the same window as larger ones isn't equal. If all your neighbors are running twice the cattle, the same window doesn't give you the same access. It gives them preference on timing because they can mobilize faster. Cole let out a slow breath. I hadn't thought it through that far. I'd want to read the actual agreement before November 3rd. I'll get a copy, he said. And the way he said it was the way he had started to say things when she'd identified a problem. Not surprised, just reallocating. She went back inside, and Rosa, who had been visible in the kitchen window during the exchange, handed her a cup of coffee without comment. They stood at the window together for a moment. Simmons has been sniffing around this property for 2 years, Rosa said, into her own cup. Why? Elena asked. Creek access on the east side. Cole's land is between Simmons's south pasture and the creek. Simmons has been wanting that access since before Cole's wife died. Elena looked at her. Rosa didn't offer more, just drank her coffee, and Elena understood she had reached the edge of what Rosa would say on this particular subject for now. She stored it away with the other things. That night she dreamed about the train station. She was on the bench, and the letter was in her hand, and she was reading it, but the words kept rearranging. The girl from Santa Fe, then the girl from somewhere else, then just the girl, over and over, like a thing repeated until it stops having meaning. She woke up at 4 a.m. with her heart going faster than it should and lay still until it slowed, staring at the hook on the wall where her coat hung. She was so tired of thinking about Harold Fitch. She was so tired of the letter and the platform and the specific shame of arriving somewhere and being returned unopened. She was tired of checking herself against it. This doesn't mean I'm not worth something. This doesn't mean I was wrong to come. This was one man's failure of character and not a verdict on my life. She had been arguing the case against that letter in her own head for 2 months, and she was exhausted by it. She got up and put on her coat and stood at the window in the dark, looking at the yard. The stars were sharp and close. The barn was a dark shape. A light was on in the bunkhouse. Rosa, maybe, or Hector, somebody else with an early morning and their own private concerns. She heard the creak of the porch and looked down. Cole was on the steps. He did this, she had discovered. Came out in the very early mornings and sat on the steps, just for a few minutes, before the day got its hands on him. She had seen it from this window before and never said anything about it, had treated it as his private time. But tonight he looked up, and she was in the window, and there was no graceful way to pretend she wasn't there. She lifted a hand, he lifted one back. After a moment he tilted his head toward the porch in a question. She considered it for 5 full seconds. Then she went downstairs. They sat on the steps together in the cold, both wrapped in coats, the yard and the mountains and the deep Colorado dark laid out in front of them. Their breath made small clouds that disappeared. "Nightmare?" he asked, without looking at her. "Not exactly. Old thing. You?" "Same," he said. They sat with that, two people who understood what old things could do to a night's sleep, and didn't ask each other for details. "The Simmons agreement?" she said, after a while. "You know he wants the East Creek access." "I know. Rosa told me he's been after it since before." She paused. "Before your wife." "Before and after," Cole said. "He made an offer on the East Parcel about 8 months after she died. Timing wasn't a coincidence." His voice was flat. Not bitter. He'd had time with it, but not gone either. "Did you consider it?" "For about a day." He looked at the mountains. "She loved that piece of land. My wife. She used to take Maggie down to the creek on Sunday afternoons. Maggie doesn't remember it. She was too small, but—" He stopped. Elena looked at the side of his face. He was looking somewhere she couldn't see. "She'd have liked what you've done with the books," he said suddenly, and his tone had shifted, had the slightly caught quality of someone who surprised themselves by saying something. Elena sat with that. "Tell me about her," she said. "If you want." He almost didn't. She could see him considering it, the way he always considered things, carefully, turning them over. Then, "She was funny," he said. "That's the thing people don't know about her because she was quiet in company. But alone she was. She'd say a thing that would make you laugh for 3 days. Dry. Just a look and 2 words and you'd be finished." He paused. "She was smarter than me. I knew it from the second month. She ran the household accounts better than I ever did and never made me feel like an idiot about it." "That's a gift," Elena said. "It is." He turned the mug in his hands. "Maggie has her eyes, different color but the same shape. The way they go serious when she's thinking." He paused. "I see it every day." Elena didn't say anything. There was nothing to say that wouldn't be either too much or not enough. After a moment, Cole said, "She'd have liked you." He said it simply as a statement of fact, not a compliment. "She liked people who were straight, who didn't waste your time." Elena looked at the yard. Her throat did the complicated thing again, the thing she'd been managing for 2 months. "I don't waste time," she said finally, which was the safest version of the many things she could have said. "I know," he said. They sat until the sky began to show the first lightning at its edge, and then Cole said he had to start the morning and went to the barn. Elena sat for a few more minutes alone, watching the dark thin out at the horizon. She was in serious trouble. She knew exactly how serious, and she knew exactly why, and she knew exactly what the problem was with all of it. She had been here on borrowed time that had become real time, in a house that had started to feel like a house she lived in rather than a house she was passing through, with a child who had drawn her into a picture using dark crayon lines for hair, and a man who had just told her his dead wife would have liked her as if that were a simple thing to say. And she was still sleeping with her trunk half organized. She was still keeping the Denver lawyer's name in the back of her ledger. Because the other thing she knew, the thing she had been knowing quietly this whole time, was that wanting something and being able to have it without someone getting hurt were 2 different questions, and she had not figured out the answer to the second one yet. Cole Brooks had a dead wife he still talked to when the mornings were too quiet. He had a daughter who grabbed Elena's hand in the dark when she was frightened. He had a ranch that Garth Simmons was circling. He had enough to manage without a woman who had arrived on his property through a failed arrangement with another man who was carrying her own set of losses, who could not honestly say whether she was staying because she wanted this or because she was afraid of what came next if she left. She went inside. She made coffee. She opened the ledger and looked at the winter accounts and did the work that needed doing because the work was real and clear, and the other things were none of those things yet. Outside, the sky finished lightning, and the ranch woke up, and Maggie came down in her nightgown with her braids from yesterday half undone, asking whether there was bread, and Rosa arrived from the bunkhouse with her apron already tied, and Hector came in stamping cold from his boots, and the kitchen filled up with the noise and warmth of a household beginning its day. Elena poured Maggie a cup of warm milk without being asked and watched the girl wrap both hands around it. "Your braids need redoing," Elena said. "I know," Maggie said into her cup. "Will you do them?" Elena looked at her, the dark gray eyes, the serious look when she was thinking. After breakfast, she said. Promise? Yes, Elena said, and the word sat in the warm kitchen air, small and straightforward and carrying more weight than it should have. I promise. She did the braids after breakfast, Maggie sitting on a kitchen chair with Rosa's comb, both of them quiet and easy together, and Elena's hands did the familiar work, and she looked at the back of this child's head and thought, this is the thing I can't afford to lose and am going to lose anyway. Unless she figured out a way to stay that was honest and real and not built on borrowed time. She didn't know how yet, but she was going to need to figure it out soon. The copy of the Simmons agreement arrived on a Monday, delivered by a ranch hand Elena didn't recognize, who handed it to Cole at the barn door and rode off without staying for coffee. Cole brought it inside and set it on the kitchen table and looked at it the way men look at things they suspect will require more of them than they currently have available. You want me to read it? Elena said. It wasn't a question. If you're willing. She read it twice. The first time for content, the second time for language. The specific language, the clauses folded into other clauses. The definitions that appeared reasonable in one paragraph and did different work 3 pages later. She had learned to read that way from Mr. Archuleta's files, the discipline of not trusting your first impression of a legal document because the first impression was what the document wanted you to have. When she finished the second read, she set it down and looked at Cole across the table. The access windows are 60 days, she said. Same for every ranch in the valley. That's what it says on the surface. But there's a coordination clause in Section 4. If 2 ranches want to use the corridor simultaneously and there's a conflict, priority goes to the operation with the highest head count in the previous calendar year. She tapped the page. Simmons ran 412 head last year. You ran 42. Every time your access window conflicts with his, and they will because the prime grazing weeks are the same for everyone, he gets priority. Cole was quiet. It also has a clause about maintenance costs, she continued. The corridor maintenance is shared equally between all signatory ranches. Equal share regardless of usage. So Simmons, who will use the corridor more than anyone else because he'll always have priority, pays the same maintenance portion as you. Cole's jaw was doing the tight thing. So I sign up to pay maintenance on land he gets to use. Essentially, and there's a non-compete provision in Section 7. Any signatory ranch agrees not to pursue independent access arrangements to the state land during the agreement term. The term is 10 years. She folded her hands on top of the document. If you sign this, you're locked out of independent creek access for a decade, and every year you'll be outcompeted for the shared corridor by Simmons's head count. Cole stood up and walked to the window. He stood there for a moment with his back to her. He's been working on this for 2 years, he said. Not a question, just arriving at it. At least, Elena said, the language is too careful for something put together quickly. Someone spent real time writing this. And the other ranchers? The smaller ones? I'd guess most of them haven't read past the first page. Equal access sounds fair if you don't keep reading. She paused. How many small operations in the valley? 4, 5, including mine. If you could get them together before November 3rd, show them the coordination clause. They might not sign. And if the smaller ranches don't sign, the agreement falls apart. Simmons needs everyone's signature because the land office wants valley consensus for the corridor permit. Cole turned from the window. He looked at her with the expression she had come to recognize as his particular version of being caught off guard. Not surprised exactly, more the look of a man recalibrating how something works. You figured all of this out in 20 minutes. I read fast. She looked at the document. And I've seen this kind of language before. My father's trading company. A supplier tried something similar with a port access agreement when I was 18. My father caught it. She paused. I helped him catch it. Cole came back to the table and sat down across from her. He looked at the agreement and then at her, and she could see him making the kind of decision that practical men make when the evidence is clear. Will you come with me to talk to the other ranchers? He asked. She had not expected that. You want me to come? You understand this better than I do. If they have questions, they may not want to hear it from me, she said carefully, because she was not unaware of how Clearwater Creek talked, as Simmons himself had noted. She was not unaware of the looks she got in town, The particular quality of being a woman who had arrived alone from somewhere else with a last name that read a certain way to certain people. Cole looked at her steadily. I'll do the talking. I just need you there if the language gets complicated. Will you come? She looked at the document. She looked at him. Yes, she said. They spent 3 days visiting ranches. Cole drove. Elena sat beside him in the wagon with the agreement in her lap. And they covered the valley in a wide loop that put miles on the horses and Cole on everything. The conversations had the same shape each time, Cole with his hat in his hands and his careful rancher's manner, explaining what he'd found. Elena sitting slightly to the side, available but not leading, speaking only when a specific clause needed clarifying. The receptions were mixed. At the Hendersons, a husband and wife team who ran a small cattle operation 2 miles north, Frank Henderson read the coordination clause himself and said a word that made his wife press her lips together. I knew something felt slick about it, he said, which was the closest he came to gratitude. At the Paulson spread, old Lars Paulson took the document and squinted at it, and then at Elena and said, She the one who read this? Cole said yes. Paulson looked at the document again. He said, which was apparently Paulson, for I believe you. The third ranch was harder. Dan Colby, 45, rangy, with the easy friendliness that sometimes covers something less easy. Let them in, offered coffee, listened to Cole with the air of a man deciding something before the conversation was finished. He looked at Elena with the direct assessment that she'd been receiving in various forms since she arrived in Clearwater Creek, the one that started at her face and moved to the document in her hands and back to her face, doing arithmetic. She work for you? Colby asked Cole. She manages operations and accounts, Cole said. Where's she from? Santa Fe, Elena said, because she was there and she could speak for herself, and she had decided, sometime in the last month, to stop waiting for other people to explain her. Colby seemed to find this answer neither here nor there. He took the agreement from her and read for a while, lips moving slightly. When he got to the coordination clause, he stopped and read it again. Then he looked up. That's not what Simmons said it meant, he said. I know what he said it meant, Elena said. This is what it says. Colby looked at Cole. Your woman did this reading? She did, Cole said, with a flatness that was not exactly correcting Colby's phrasing, but wasn't confirming it either. Colby set the agreement on his own table and looked at it like it had done something personally offensive. I'll think on it, he said. That was the best they got from him, and it was enough. On the drive back from Colby's, the afternoon going gray and cold around them, Elena was quiet for a while and Cole let her be. The wagon rolled through the bare October fields and the mountains were low clouds on the horizon, and she sat with her coat pulled close and the document in her lap and the particular tiredness of a day spent in rooms where she had to calculate constantly how much of herself she was permitted to take up. Colby will come around, Cole said. Maybe. He's not a bad man, just... I know, she said. She did know. She had met enough Dans in her life to distinguish between the ones who were operating from malice and the ones who were operating from habit. Colby was habit. It was less satisfying to be dismissed from habit than from malice. Malice had a target, at least. Habit was just indifferent. You handled it well, Cole said. She looked at the road ahead. I handled it the way I had to. He glanced at her. Those aren't the same thing. She thought about that. He was right. They weren't. She filed it away. The Cattle Association meeting was November 3rd, a Thursday evening, at the town hall, which was a drafty wooden building on the main street between the feed supply and the barber shop. Elena had not intended to attend. She was not a ranch owner and had no official standing, and the meeting was for ranch operators. And she had already done what she could do with the document and the visits. She was at the kitchen table at 6:30 when Cole came in from checking the horses, dressed for the meeting in his better coat with his hair combed. Come with me, he said. I don't have standing to speak. You don't have to speak. Come anyway. She looked at him. He looked back with the patient steadiness he brought to things he had already decided. Let me get my coat, she said. The hall was full for the valley. Maybe 30 people in a room built for 40, ranchers and their wives, a few men Elena recognized from town. Simmons was already there, standing near the front with 2 other men she didn't know. And when Cole and Elena came in together, Simmons's eyes moved to her, and then to Cole, and then back to the front of the room with the controlled expression of a man recalibrating. The association chairman opened the meeting, a heavy-set man named Price, who ran the largest spread after Simmons. He laid out the corridor agreement in broad strokes: equal access, shared maintenance, the State Land Commission's requirements. He used the word fair 4 times. Cole waited until Price was done, then raised his hand. "I'd like to ask about the coordination clause," he said. Section 4. The room shifted. Simmons, Elena noticed, did not move. Cole walked through it carefully, without drama. Just the language and what it meant in practical terms. He had written notes on a folded piece of paper, and he read from them, and the notes were in Elena's handwriting because they had sat at the kitchen table the previous night, and she had written out the key points in the plainest possible language, and he had added his own in the margins. It was a joint product, and she was watching from a chair against the wall while he presented it, and she thought, this is what this is. This is us working. When Cole finished, Frank Henderson spoke up immediately. "That's exactly what I read." And Lars Paulson made his HM sound again. And across the room, 2 other ranchers were bending their heads together in the way of people who had just been given a lens to look through something they'd only felt as vague unease. Simmons stood up. He was not a man who panicked. She had to give him that. He stood with his easy authority and explained that the coordination clause was a practical necessity, that someone had to have priority in conflict situations, and it was logical to use headcount, and that the equal maintenance cost was simply the price of shared infrastructure. "It's logical if you're the one with the most headcount," Cole said. Simmons looked at him. The 2 of them, across the room, and the air between them had the quality of something that had been building for longer than this meeting. "You've been lawyering at this agreement, Brooks," Simmons said. His voice was still pleasant. "Where'd that come from, exactly?" Cole said nothing. Simmons looked at Elena, sitting against the wall. "Ah," he said, just that, with a smile that managed to be dismissive without being explicit about it. Elena kept her expression still and her hands in her lap. She was not going to give him a reaction. She had understood, the moment he walked into this room, that anything she did here could be turned into the problem. The woman who came from somewhere else and stirred things up. She sat against the wall and let Cole hold the floor because this was his valley and his fight, and she had given him what she could give him, and now the rest of it was his. "I'd like a vote," Cole said, still looking at Simmons. "Who wants to table the agreement for revision before any signatures?" 6 hands went up, including Cole's. It was enough. The association rules required 3/4 majority for passage, and they didn't have it. Simmons' pleasant expression held. He was a man who played long games. "We'll revisit at the December meeting," he said, and sat down. On the way home, the wagon cold and the road dark, Cole was quiet for a long time. Elena let it alone. "He'll come back with a revised version," Cole said eventually. "Yes, but now the other ranchers are looking for the clause. He can't bury it twice." She looked at the road. "He'll try a different angle." "The east parcel." "I think so. He wants the creek access badly enough to try other ways." Cole drove for a while without speaking. The horse moved through the dark with the patient rhythm of an animal that knew its way home. Above them the stars were out again, enormous and cold. "Elena," Cole said. "Yes." He seemed to weigh something. What happens if Simmons goes at this from a different direction, not the association, something more direct? She looked at him. In the dark she could see the line of his jaw, the set of his shoulders. She understood what he was not quite saying. "If he makes a direct offer on the east parcel," she said carefully, "it would have to be to you. It's your land. He can't get it any other way, unless he finds a way to make keeping it too expensive." Cole's voice was even, but she heard what was underneath it. Not fear exactly. The voice of a man holding something carefully because he cannot afford to drop it. She thought about the ranch's winter accounts, which she knew better than anyone except possibly Rosa, who knew them from the household side. She thought about the $60 recovered from the feed supplier, which had gone immediately into the hay stores. She thought about the machinery fund, which existed on paper and not in practice. "I've been looking at the numbers," she said. "I know you have. If you could get a buyer for the spring calf lot by February, instead of waiting for the summer auction, you'd have enough to cover the winter comfortably and start the machinery fund with something real." She paused. "I know someone. My father's company used to deal with a buyer out of Denver, a man named Reyes. He scouts winter stock. If he's still operating, he might come out here. Cole turned and looked at her in the dark. It was too dark to read his expression clearly, but she felt the look. "You have contacts in Denver," he said. "My father had contacts. Some of them are still there." "You've been thinking about this a while." She looked at the road. "I think about the ranch," she said. "I can't help it." Cole was quiet again, and the silence this time had a different weight to it. Not the comfortable silence of two people used to each other's quiet, but something more considered. The silence of someone arriving at something. They got back to the ranch, and Cole took the horse to the barn, and Elena went inside and found Rosa had kept dinner warm on the stove, and Maggie had, predictably, fallen asleep on the kitchen bench, waiting for them rather than going to bed as instructed. She was curled with her coat over her like a blanket, her braids half undone against the wood, her boots still on. Elena stood looking at her for a moment. She picked up the coat and resettled it more evenly over the girl's shoulder, and Maggie stirred but didn't wake, and Elena stood there a second longer than she needed to, doing nothing but looking at this face she had not planned to love. She went to the table and opened her ledger and found the page where she had written Reyes's last known address from memory. She had not taken anything from her father's house except his ledger, and his ledger was in her trunk, and Reyes's address was in the back of it in her father's cramped hand. She had copied it into her own ledger one night 3 weeks ago, without deciding why. The way you keep something because it might be useful later. She sat at the table and began drafting the letter. She heard Cole come in from the barn. He stopped when he saw Maggie on the bench, and the expression on his face was the one that appeared only when he thought no one was watching. Unguarded, the specific weariness and tenderness of a man who has been caring for something alone for a long time. He looked at his daughter, and he looked tired in the bone-deep way of someone who carries everything himself and has forgotten what it was like not to. He saw Elena at the table, writing. "Reyes," she said, without looking up, "I'm drafting a letter. I need the February calf projection numbers, if you have them." He went to the shelf where he kept his cattle records and brought back the notebook and set it beside her, and he sat down across the table and went through his own notes, and they worked together in the warm kitchen with Maggie asleep on the bench, and Rosa's lamp low on the counter, two people doing the work that needed doing, and the house settled around them with the ease of something that had found its shape. At some point, Cole said, quietly, not looking up from his notebook, "I don't know what I'd do without you on this now. I want you to know I know that." Elena kept writing. Her pen moved. She did not let herself look up. "I know you know," she said, and her voice was steady, which cost her something. He didn't say anything else, but he also didn't move away, didn't take his notebook and go to the other side of the room. He stayed at the table across from her, and they worked until the lamp started to dim, and the only sounds were the scratch of pen on paper and the small night sounds of a house that held, in its walls and its kitchen and its sleeping child, everything Elena Navarro had not let herself want. She had figured out, sometime between the town hall meeting and the dark ride home, that she was past the point of protecting herself from this. She had been trying to hold herself at a careful distance from the whole of it, the man, the child, the ranch, the life. And she had failed. She had failed comprehensively and probably around day 15, and she was only now fully admitting it. What she had not figured out was what Cole Brooks actually wanted, what she was to him, whether she was someone he had come to rely on and would miss when she left, or something else. She could not tell, from inside the warmth of it, whether the warmth was mutual or whether she was simply a person who was useful and present, which were two things this family needed badly and which could look, from the inside, very much like something more. She closed her ledger when the letter was finished. She said goodnight. She went to her room and latched the door and sat on the edge of the narrow bed and looked at the hook on the wall and breathed. Tomorrow, she would send the letter. The ranch would get its winter footing. Simmons would make his next move, and they would be ready for it. And somewhere in the middle of all of that, one of them was going to have to say the true thing out loud. She didn't know yet whether it would be her. She didn't know whether she was brave enough, or whether brave was even the right word for it. What she knew was that the trunk in the corner of this room had been fully unpacked for 2 weeks, and she hadn't written to the Denver lawyer in a month. And when she tried to picture leaving, the picture wouldn't hold its shape. That was either courage or foolishness, and she wasn't entirely sure which. She was starting to think it might be both. The letter to Reyes went out on a Friday. The reply came back in 11 days, which was faster than Elena had expected, And the answer was yes. He would come to Clearwater Creek in the third week of February to inspect the spring calf lot, and if the animals were what the letter described, he was prepared to discuss a contract. Cole read the letter at the kitchen table and set it down and said nothing for a moment. "That's a good price range he's quoting," Elena said. "It's a very good price range. He'll negotiate down. He always does. My father said he was constitutionally unable to accept a first offer, but even negotiated down, it puts you ahead of the summer auction by enough to matter." Cole looked at the letter and then at her. "Your father's contact. You kept that in your head all this time." "I kept it in my ledger," she said. "My father's handwriting, in the back. He didn't say anything to that." He folded the letter carefully and put it in the front of his own record book, which was where he put things that mattered. She noticed that. She did not remark on it. What happened with Simmons came 3 days later, and it came differently than she had predicted, which was her own failure of imagination. She had been expecting another angle on the East Parcel, another agreement, another meeting, some organized pressure through the Cattle Association. She had been watching for formal moves because Simmons was a man who worked through institutions when he could, who preferred to have the machinery of agreements and associations doing his work while he stood at the front of rooms looking reasonable. She had not expected him to come to the ranch on a Tuesday morning when Cole was out on the north fence line with Hector, and to come alone, and to knock on the front door like a man paying a social call. Rosa answered. Elena was at the kitchen table. She heard Rosa's voice and then Simmons's, and she closed her ledger and stood up. He came into the kitchen with his hat in his hand and the easy smile working, and he looked around the room with the proprietary gaze of a man imagining different furniture. "Mrs. Flores," he said to Rosa pleasantly, "would you give us a minute?" Rosa looked at Elena. "I'll come find you if I need anything," Elena said. Rosa went, which meant she stood just outside the kitchen door, which Elena knew and Simmons probably didn't. "Miss Navarro," Simmons said, and sat down across from her without being invited, the chair that Cole usually sat in. "You're a hard woman to get alone. I wasn't aware you were trying. I heard what happened at the November meeting. You did good work." He said it with genuine acknowledgement, which she distrusted immediately. Men like Simmons didn't compliment you unless they wanted something the compliment was meant to soften. "Thank you," she said, and waited. "Here's what I think," he said, leaning back in the chair with the relaxed confidence of a man on his own porch. "You're smart. Smarter than most people in this valley, man or woman. You've been here, 3 months? 4? And you already understand this ranch better than Brooks does in some ways." He paused. "That's not an insult to him. He's a good rancher, but he doesn't see the bigger picture the way you do." Elena kept her face still. "What is it you want, Mr. Simmons?" "I want to offer you a job," he said. "Real salary. 3 times what Brooks is paying you, I'd wager. You'd manage accounts for my entire operation. It's 6 times the size of this one. The work would be worth your time." There it was. Not the East Parcel. Her. She understood it immediately. The full shape of it. Take her out of the equation, remove the person who had read the agreement and organized the ranchers and written the letter to Reyes, and Cole Brooks was back to running behind on his books and missing contract clauses and standing alone against whatever Simmons built next. It was, she had to admit, cleaner than going after the land directly. "I see," she said. "You'd have a real position. Real money. I know what you came here for originally. I know about Fitch. Everyone does. Small town. And I know that didn't work out. You deserve something that actually works out." He said this with what appeared to be genuine sympathy, which she found more offensive than hostility would have been. She looked at the table for a moment. She thought about the letter in the back of her ledger. She thought about Harold Fitch's note, the girl from Santa Fe, and the platform, and the bench, and Maggie appearing from around the corner post asking if she was lost. She thought about 11 days waiting for Reyes to write back, and Cole saying, "I don't know what I'd do without you on this now," and the trunk in her room that had been fully unpacked for 2 weeks. "No," she said. Simmons' expression shifted just slightly. "You should think about it." "I have thought about it. No." She folded her hands on the table. "And I'd like you to leave now, Mr. Simmons. Cole will be back in an hour, and I'd rather this conversation be finished before he is, because if he comes home and finds you here, this will become something larger than it needs to be." Simmons looked at her for a long moment. The pleasantness had gone, replaced by something more direct. Not threatening, just the uncovered version of what had been there all along. "You're making a mistake," he said. "Possibly," she said. "It'll be mine to make." He stood, put on his hat, and left. She heard his horse on the yard, and then the sound of it diminishing, and then Rosa came back into the kitchen and stood at the counter and said nothing, which was the loudest endorsement Elena had ever received. She sat at the table for a while after that, not working, just sitting with the fact that she had said no, and that the no had not been difficult, and understanding what that meant about where she actually stood. She told Cole that evening, all of it, without softening the business logic of what Simmons had been trying to do. Cole listened with his arms crossed and his jaw in the tight line, and when she finished, he was quiet for a long moment. "He came here when I was gone," Cole said. "Yes." "He figured I wouldn't—" Cole stopped, restarted. "He thought you might consider it if I wasn't here. He probably thought a woman in my position would consider any offer that looked like stability," she said carefully. "He wasn't entirely wrong to think that. A few months ago, he might have been right." Cole looked at her. What changed? The question sat in the kitchen air between them, and Elena looked at the man across from her. This man with flour on his sleeve from helping Rosa with the morning biscuits because Hector had needed him early and Rosa had been short-handed. This man who had held a branch back for her on a cold October walk without making a thing of it, who had told her his dead wife would have liked her and clearly not understood what he was saying when he said it. And she thought, "All right, now. I stopped treating this as temporary," she said. "That's what changed." Cole was very still. "I've been waiting," she said, "to see what this was. Whether it was just—" She searched for the word. "Circumstances. Two people in the same situation, working the same problem. I didn't want to mistake usefulness for something else." "Elena, let me finish." She had started, and she was going to do it completely or not at all. "I'm not asking you for anything. I want to be clear about that. I'm not asking you to feel something specific. I'm just telling you that I'm not here because I have nowhere else to go, and I'm not here because I'm afraid of what's next. I'm here because this is where I want to be, the ranch and Maggie and—" She stopped, looked at the table, then back at him. "And you. That's the honest truth of it." Cole stood across from her, and she watched the thing that moved across his face. Not surprised, something that looked more like a man who has been holding a door closed for a long time, finally letting go of the handle. "I've been trying to figure out," he said slowly, "how to say something to you for about 6 weeks, without saying the wrong thing and ruining what we already have." "What were you going to say?" He let out a breath. "That I'd like you to stay, permanently, not as—" He stopped, ran a hand through his hair, which was the gesture he made when the words were not cooperating. "Not the arrangement, not work. I'd like you to stay as—" He looked at her directly with the straightforward difficulty of a man who is not practiced at this. "As my wife, if you were willing." The kitchen was very quiet. "Cole," she said, "I know the way I'm saying it isn't—" "You're saying it fine," she said, and her voice was not entirely steady, which she stopped trying to manage. "You're saying it exactly like yourself, which is fine." He looked at her. Something in him, she could see it, was waiting for the rest of it. "Yes," she said, "I'm willing." The moment was not cinematic. He didn't cross the room in 3 steps. They were 2 tired people in a kitchen at the end of a hard day, sitting across from each other across a table full of ledgers. And what happened was that the space between them changed quality, became something that had a future in it instead of just a present. Cole reached across the table and put his hand over hers, and she turned her hand and held it, and they sat like that for a moment in the plain, warm kitchen with the lamp going low. Then the door opened and Maggie came in from Rosa's, stamping cold from her boots, braids intact because Elena had done them that morning, and she stopped in the doorway and looked at her father, and then at Elena, and then at their hands on the table, with the particular sharp-eyed attention of a child who misses very little. "Did something happen?" she demanded. Cole looked at Elena. Elena looked at Maggie. "Come here," Elena said. Maggie came to the table with the wariness of a child who has been told things at kitchen tables before, some of them hard. She stood beside Elena and looked between them. "Your father asked me something," Elena said, "and I said yes." Maggie processed this. Her gray eyes went to her father. "What did you ask?" I asked Elena to stay, Cole said. For good. To be part of our family. Maggie was quiet for a moment that felt longer than it was. Then she said, in a very small voice that was different from her usual voice, like a mother? Like whatever you want to call it, Elena said carefully, because she was not going to claim a word that belonged to someone else. I can't be what you don't remember, but I can be here, every day, if you want that. Maggie looked at her for 3 full seconds with those serious gray eyes. Then she climbed into Elena's lap with the complete bodily confidence of a child who has decided, and put both arms around her neck and held on. Elena held her back. Her eyes went to the window, to the dark outside, to nothing in particular, because she was not going to cry at the kitchen table. She had made that deal with herself a long time ago. She cried anyway, quietly, without making a production of it. And Maggie, who was not crying but was holding on with both arms, said into her shoulder, I already told Rosa you were going to stay. Elena laughed, which turned the crying into something else. When did you tell her that? A long time ago, Maggie said, in the tone of someone who has been waiting for the adults to catch up. Cole across the table was looking at both of them with the expression she had only seen on him in unguarded moments, the one that was all the things he didn't say out loud. He was not a man who cried, or if he was, he did it in private, and she respected that. But something in him was open in a way it hadn't been when she first arrived, and she thought about what he had said on the porch, like the whole world went away somewhere, and thought that maybe the world had come back a little, for both of them. Not the same world. A different one. The February visit from Reyes happened on a cold Tuesday, the man arriving in a good coat and a practical horse with the assessing eyes of someone who had been buying cattle for 30 years. He walked the lot, asked his questions, tried 3 times to negotiate Elena below her floor price, and eventually agreed to the number she had held since the second counteroffer. The contract was signed at the kitchen table with Cole on one side and Reyes on the other, and Elena's copy of the clause provisions next to the ink pot, just in case. Reyes shook Cole's hand. Then he looked at Elena. You negotiate like your father, he said. I know, she said. Thank you. After he left, Cole looked at the signed contract for a moment, then at her. He didn't say anything, but he put his hand briefly on her shoulder as he passed, the easy touch of a man who had stopped holding himself careful, and she felt the warmth of it long after he'd gone back out to the barn. Simmons made one more move in March. A direct offer letter on the East parcel, lowball, the kind of offer that insults you into considering it by how much it underestimates you. Elena drafted the refusal letter with language she had borrowed from Mr. Archuleta's files, polite and immovable. She and Cole both signed it. She mailed it on a Wednesday, and they did not discuss it further. The Cattle Association met in April. The revised corridor agreement that Simmons brought to the table had the coordination clause stripped out, and the maintenance costs restructured proportionally. It was, all things considered, actually fair. He had understood, somewhere between November and April, that the smaller ranchers were now paying attention in a way they hadn't before, and that the woman who had taught them to pay attention wasn't going away. Cole signed the agreement at the April meeting. Frank Henderson and Lars Paulson signed it. Even Dan Colby signed, and as he passed Elena on the way out, he stopped and said stiffly, in the manner of a man performing an act of will, Good work you did, on the original one. He did not wait for a response, and she did not try to give him one. It was enough. They were married in May, on a Saturday afternoon, outside because the house was too small, and the weather was finally warm enough to make outside reasonable. Rosa made food for 3 hours the previous day, and would accept no help except from Maggie, who stood on a stool beside her and was mostly in the way, but was Rosa's to manage. Hector wore his good shirt and spent the morning being uncomfortable in it. The Hendersons came, and the Paulsons, and 2 women from town who had extended Elena a quiet, uncomplicated friendliness over the winter that she had accepted with equal quiet. The ceremony was simple and short, performed by the justice of the peace, a small man named Webb who read from a card and mispronounced Elena's surname and was otherwise adequate to the task. Cole held her hand during it, and his hand was dry and steady, and his eyes were on her face the whole time in the way of a man who is making sure this is real. Maggie stood beside Elena in a dress Rosa had made, yellow with a white collar, her braids done with actual skill now, because Elena had been doing them for 6 months and had gotten good at it. She held Elena's other hand throughout the ceremony with the grip of someone who was not letting go. That night, after the guests had gone and Maggie was asleep, and the house had settled into its night sounds, Elena stood at the bedroom window looking out at the yard. The barn, the fence lines, the mountains in the last of the evening light. Behind her, Cole was sitting on the edge of the bed, doing nothing in particular, just there. She thought about a bench at a train station and a letter that called her the girl from Santa Fe. She thought about her father's ledger in the trunk, Reyes's address in the back in cramped handwriting. She thought about a child appearing from around a corner post with untidy braids and asking, "Are you lost?" She had been lost. She had been lost in the specific way of someone who has arrived somewhere and been rejected before they could even unpack, who has had the ground pulled from under a plan they built carefully over 4 months. She had sat on that bench and run the numbers and found they all came up empty. What she had not known, sitting on that bench, was that the emptiness was not an ending. It was just a clearing, a space where something else could begin if she was stubborn enough not to get back on the train. She had always been stubborn. That had never been her problem. "Elena," Cole said from behind her. Come to bed." She turned from the window. The room was warm, the lamp low, and Cole was looking at her with the easy directness he'd had from the beginning, the quality she had trusted before she had words for why. She crossed the room and sat beside him, and he put his arm around her, and they sat for a moment like that in the quiet. "I threw away the photograph," she said. She had done it 2 weeks ago. The blurry image of Harold Fitch standing beside a fence post, taken it from under her second-best dress where it had been sitting since October, and burned it in the kitchen stove one evening when no one was watching. "What photograph?" Cole asked. "The man from the station. The original arrangement." Cole was quiet for a moment. "You kept it all this time." "Evidence," she said, "of what I survived. I keep things. I know you do." He was quiet. "Do you feel better?" "Having burned it." She thought about it honestly. "A little," she said. "Mostly it just felt like finishing something." He nodded. That was the thing about Cole. He understood the difference between healing and closing, understood that some things you didn't get over so much as learn to carry differently. His wife's Sunday afternoons at the creek, her 4 months of letters, the specific losses that don't go away but do, over time, stop being the loudest thing in the room. She leaned against him, and outside the window the mountains were going dark under a sky full of stars, the same enormous Colorado sky that had looked indifferent to her the first night she arrived, that looked different to her now. Not warmer, the sky doesn't warm up for you, it's still just sky, but familiar, known. Hers, in the way that a place becomes yours not because you were born to it, but because you chose it, and it held. She had come here as the girl from Santa Fe, and she was leaving that name at the kitchen stove with the photograph where it belonged. She was Elena Brooks now, which was a different thing, not a better last name, not a completion she had been waiting for to feel whole, because she had been whole enough to hold herself together on a bench in a strange town with $4.50 and nowhere to go. But a name that meant something, a name that meant she was here, and choosing to be here, and not going anywhere. In the morning there would be the books, and Maggie's braids, and the north fence line, and whatever came next. There was always something coming next. That was the nature of a working life on working land. It didn't let you stand still long enough to feel sorry for yourself, which was, she had come to believe, part of the point. But tonight was tonight, and tonight was enough. She stayed where she was, in the warm room, in the quiet house, with the mountains dark outside the window and the child sleeping down the hall and the man beside her breathing slow and steady, and she let herself have it, this life, this particular and imperfect and real life, without qualifying it or counting the ways it might still go wrong. Some things you earn by surviving them. Some things you earn by staying when leaving would have been easier. She had done both, and this was what it looked like. Not perfect, not easy, not what she had planned. Better.